Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thanks for watching another video on our leaders. Today we will be covering Saeed Ebrahim Raisi, or Ebrahim Raisi, the president of Iran, and Alexander van der Bellen, the president of Austria. So two very important leaders. They're not the largest countries on our list, but I think they both hit very much above their weight class, and I think these two countries will be in perpetuity important countries, so important leaders also to follow. So without further ado, let's begin with Ebrahim Raisi. So Ebrahim Raisi was born on December 14th of 1960, making this his 61st or 62nd year. He's currently 61 in December. He'll turn 62. He's an Islamist, principalist, politician, a former Muslim jurist, and the 8th and current president of Iran since August 3rd, 2021, which is actually my birthday during the 2020 election. So he's only been in this position for a short period. However, he's considered, as we'll see, there's many reasons to believe he'll be in an important position going forward. In fact, it might be noted also that Iran has a supreme leader, but the president is the one we'll be covering, and there's many talks that Raisi will be the supreme leader soon enough, but we will cover that shortly. He served in the judicial system as Deputy Chief Justice from 2004 to 2014, as Attorney General from 2014 to 2016, and Chief Justice from 2019 to 2021, so right up until he became president. He ran for president, however, also in 2017 for Conservative Popular Front of the Islamic Revolution Forces, unsuccessfully, however. And currently he has sanctions from the U.S. Office of Foreign Affairs for crimes against humanity, and also by UN special reporters for being one of the four responsible for the prosecution committee for the murder of thousands in the 1988. It's called the Death Committee, but we'll cover that in more detail. So, and he's also most importantly seen as the front runner to succeed Ali Khamenei as supreme leader. So this, although he's not currently the supreme leader, I think as to make this video somewhat more timeless, I think he ultimately will be supreme leader, and I think this is important to kind of get a sort of biography in on him early. So starting with his early life, he was born on December 14th, 1960 to a clerical family in Nogan district of Mashhad, which is the second biggest city in Iran with 3 million people. The largest city is Tehran, which is the capital, which is quite a bit larger at 8 million people. His father was named Saeed Haji, and he died when he was only 5 years old. So that's, I think, an important detail to note, that he spent much of his life without a biological father. He is among the descendants of Hussein ibn Ali Saids, which was the son of Ali ibn Abi Talib, which is also related to Muhammad on the Saeed side. And also he's related to Ali on the other side, who was the nephew of Muhammad. So on both sides of his family, he's got a very powerful background, or very important, perhaps a very important or a very family background. Just to get that right, the Ali was the cousin and stepson of Muhammad, which is, he's probably the leading figure in Shia Islam. So in terms of his primary education, he completed this at the Jaradiya School and continued his studies in Hausa Shia Islamic Seminary School, so taking quite a religious educational path. In 1975, he went to Ayatollah Burjurdi School to study at the Quran Seminary, which is the largest seminary in Iran, when he was 15 years old. It was founded in 1922, so about exactly 100 years old at this point. He continued to Nawab for a short period and then returned to the Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Musari Nazad School to study and teach. Then he went back to the Quran Ayatollah Burjurdi School, and he passed his Karakfak, which is his, pardon me for my pronunciation, his external fiqh, or his Islamic jurisprudence to program to under Saeed Ali Khamenei. who was the supreme leader at the time. So you complete your legal studies under a specific supreme leader. Alex van Vateneng of the Middle East Institute questioned his actual religious qualifications. So at one point he claimed that he was an Ayatollah, which is the top of the clerical industry, but put this on his personal website, but he later took it down and claimed that he was a Hojat ol Eslanna, which is one rank below an Ayatollah, right before the 2021 elections. And during the decree by Supreme Leader appointing him as president by Ali Khamenei, he was called a Hojat ol Islam. So he's not the highest rank in the clerical industry. So I guess the takeaway here is that one mustn't actually go to the very top of, or get all the qualifications to qualify as president, which I think is a merit, in fact. Starting with his judicial career in 1981, when he was in his 21st year, so most of the time he was 20 because he's got a late birthday, he was appointed a prosecutor of Karaj and later the prosecutor of Hamadan, and actually he served both these cities simultaneously, which are about 300 kilometers apart, so it's amazing that he managed to pull that off. Maybe just taking long drives in between the two jobs, I suppose. But he only served in this for 4 months, and he later became prosecutor for the Hamadan province, so moving from city-level prosecutor to a state-level prosecutor, so moving up very quickly within his 21st year. In 1985, he was appointed prosecutor of Tehran, which is the capital, at 25 years old, and then thus he moved to the capital. 3 years later, he was placed in service of Ruhollah Khomeini, who is the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as leader in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. So to what extent he had exposure to this leader is up to debate, but obviously he did know this very important leading figure in the revolution, and probably a very great mentor, whether or not it was a two-way street or maybe just him listening or whatnot, but either way he had contact to one of the founders of the Islamic Republic, or the Iranian Republic. He was assigned special provisions, which are independent of the judiciary in legal issues in provinces including Loristan, Seman, and Kermanshah. Pardon me for the pronunciation. So although he was in the judiciary, at this point he started to get kind of special jobs outside of the scope of his formal legal education. In July 1988, when he was on his 28th year, Hussein Ali Montazeri, who was a theologian and leader from the Iranian Revolution, appointed him as one of the 4 individuals responsible for trying and ultimately executing of Iranian prisoners, political prisoners. So the majority were from the militant People's Mujahideen of Iran, which had plotted to overthrow Iran through a military coup. However, other leftist factions, including the Fedayins and the Tudeh Communist Party of Iran, were also executed. So it's important to note at this point he was only 28 years old and responsible for so many executions. According to Amnesty International, thousands were killed and subjected to purge and torture and inhumane treatment, and issued by the Supreme Leader. So it must be noted that perhaps maybe he did not have too much control on this. If it's coming from the Supreme Leader, can he turn down the position? Also, from an opportunistic standpoint, would it be wise or even from a risk mitigation standpoint, would it be wise to turn down such a position? But nonetheless, one estimate says there's 30,000 were executed, and they measured it by the amount of forklifts lifting the bodies in 30-minute intervals. Another measure is 2,800 to 30,800 in Hussein Ali Montazeri's memoirs, who was the deputy of the Supreme Leader, Ruhollah Khomeini. So that's probably the most accurate. So, but anywhere between 1,000 and 30,000 is the number who have died. But I think 2,800 to 3,800 is probably closest. But nonetheless, a very large number, mostly left-leaning factions and mostly from the military coup organization. Later, the death of the Supreme Leader Khomeini and the election of Ali Khamenei as new supreme leader in 1989, when he was only 29 years old, or 29th year. Raisi was appointed as Tehran prosecutor by the new Chief Justice Mohammad Yazik, and he held this position for 5 years. So in the capital, being a leading prosecutor, especially after having such a big part in the executions, is a pretty powerful position. But also being appointed directly by the Chief Justice is quite a recognition of one's importance in society. In 2004 to 2014, or in 1994, after 5 years of serving as Tehran prosecutor in his 34th year, he was appointed and held the office of General Inspection Officer. From 2004 to 2014, so coming up to his 44th year, he was appointed first Deputy Chief Justice of Iran by the Chief Justice Mohammad Hougamani Sharauri. He kept this position for even into the first term of the next Chief Justice, Sadek Larijani. So it's important to note that many different Chief Justices also endorsed him. So it's not just one individual bringing him up through the hierarchy, you could call it, but there's multiple Chief Justices individually supporting him. In 2014, his 54th year, he was appointed as Attorney General of Iran. In 2016, in his 56th year, he became chairman of the Astan Quds Razavi, which is a bonnyard. So to briefly talk about this, bonnyard is a charitable non-petroleum trust. They make about 20% of Iran's GDP, and the vast majority is in oil, but they're basically like non-profit organizations, or largely dedicated to charity, mostly for religious purposes, and they comprise a big part of Iran's GDP. So, and this was in Mashhad, which is his home city. So going back to the second largest city, kind of like it's not exactly the private sector, but kind of doing some private sector time after spending so much time in the judiciary. Since 2012, he had also been a special clerical court prosecutor by order of the Supreme Leader Saeed Ali Khamenei. So he's already got contact with the new Supreme Leader and already getting special tasks by the current Supreme Leader. He also became a member of the Supreme Selection Board, which is responsible for choosing the Supreme Leader. He founded the Fatima Ali Zahra Seminary in Tehran, so being faithful to his religion and multitasking in that respect. He also became a member of the Supreme Council of Cyberspace, so quite a forward thinker, one could conclude. And he also is a member of the Monetary and Credit Council, and also a member of the Anti-Corruption Headquarters. So taking many different tasks here. So he's not just limited to the judiciary or to the clerical sides of things, or even to the Banyad. He has had many other involvements throughout this period. Coming up to 2017, so quite recently, his first attempt at running for president, he was named one of the Popular Front of Islamic Revolution Forces presidential candidate. His candidacy was also supported by the Front of Islamic Revolution Stability, so two parties supporting him. He announced this on April 6th, the election, and he said he had a religious and revolutionary responsibility to run. So important to note, as an Islamist, he doesn't just believe there's the demand for it, but also the religious calling to fill this role. He also said there needed a fundamental change in the executive management of the country, so kind of criticizing the incumbents, but evidently he has a good connection with the Supreme Leader. He also said he wanted to fight for poverty and corruption. So once again, corruption, but also poverty, as we'll talk about the GDP later. Iran's economy has not been faring as well recently due to the being so dependent on petroleum. At this time, he was already cited as a possible successor to the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, and on May 15th, however, the conservative candidate Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf withdrew his candidacy in favor of Raisi. And there was talks that he would become prime minister instead and let Raisi have the presidency. And he even helped in the Tehran campaign. So it's interesting to see his competitors are even coming to support him. However, he lost to the incumbent President Rouhani with 38.3% of the votes. He was the second most with 15,786,449 votes. But he did not, and after losing this, he did not even congratulate Rouhani, and he even submitted 100 pages to the Guardian Council seeking to look into violations of the voting laws. So he wasn't very happy or I guess humble in his defeat. However, in 2021, he came back and won 48.8% voter turnout, won 28.9 million votes versus 42.4 million in he won 42.4 million votes and he had previously won 28.9. And however, it must be noted that so there was 3.7 million were not even counted. So, pardon me, to get the numbers right, the population is 83.99 million, 42.4 million voted, so only 48% voter turnout, of which he won 28.9 million votes. Of the 42.4 million votes that were cast, 3.7 were not even counted for supposedly being blank or invalid. Nonetheless, he won 62% of the vote and became president of Iran as we know him today. There were, at the time, 600 candidates who were vying to be president, 40 of which were women. However, last minute, only 7 were approved 1 month before the election by the Guardian Council. So, not as many people who had hoped were able to run. Also, the former president, Mohammed Ahmadinejad, said he wouldn't even vote because I do not want to be part of this sin. So there's a lot of people who thought this election might have been corrupt. I think it is a little strange that 3.7 million votes were blank or invalid. I think it's strange for someone to submit a blank vote. I think it's, if you don't like someone, vote for the opposite. There were 7 candidates, but maybe it was so corrupt that they just thought prove a point by voting blank. But I think 3.7 million blank or invalid votes is a very large number. But also having only 48.8% voter turnout shows either lack of interest or lack of confidence in the democratic system, or just they kind of defeatist in that they knew that Raisi would win anyways. So in terms of his presidency, which has only been since August 3rd, my birthday, but he's been done a lot since then. By decree of the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, he was called a Hoja ol Elsan, which is second, which is not an Ayatollah, so perhaps kind of a stab at him, but he, I think, very much respects and admires the Supreme Leader, so he accepted that name, and it's probably true if the Supreme Leader called him an Ayatollah. I think the Supreme Leader had probably done his research. And nonetheless, he won, so it's not going to hold him back much anymore. In his inauguration speech, he said he would seek to lift U.S. sanctions on Iran, but not let foreigners dictate how our country is run. The Islamic Consultative Assembly, sworn in on August 5th, he gave a speech saying he reiterated the U.S. stance. He also said Iran is responsible for stabilizing the Middle East and improving the quality and life of the Iranians and defend human rights. So I think the most important here is also reiterating his stance on the U.S., but also he believes Iran is responsible for stabilizing the Middle East. So it's a very key country in the region, and he believes it as well. In the fall of Kabul to the Taliban in the 16th of August and withdrawal of U.S. forces from Afghanistan, he said this is a chance to stabilize the country, so he saw it as a positive thing, which Iran supported. He called all parties, including the Taliban, on September 18th to form inclusive government and not allow terrorist groups, including Islamic State, along the border with Afghanistan. So it's interesting that he actually communicates with the Taliban, but he also wants to see a inclusive government, so including members of both the Taliban but also non-Taliban and but also he does not want Islamic State along the border, the Afghanistan-Iranian border, which I think is important to note. Obviously, he is not a supporter of Islamic State, or maybe he does. Maybe he is behind closed doors, but as far as we know, he does not want them near his country. He had a clash with Argentina over the appointment of Mohsen Rezaei as Vice President of Economic Affairs. The conflict clashed because of this individual had an alleged involvement in the AMIA bombing in Argentina. On September 4th, he renewed the trucker discussions, which stalled by elections and foreign pressures. It was mentioned in the 76th session in the UN General Assembly that the U.S. hegemony was unjust and rejected around the world. So big speech in front of the UN very recently. His COVID vaccinations have surged since he's taken office, so supposedly doing better than his predecessor. However, he has more information than his predecessor, so perhaps not as debatably not as impressive, but or perhaps he has really done it. We'd have to do a statistical study, or like what would be like the average change of a president of with information. It's too complicated, hard to tell, but the point is it has improved since he came into power. He had a request for the arrest for crimes against humanity from the UN if he attended the 2021 UN climate change in Scotland. I think this is an interesting one. So although the UN has their quarrels with him, they said they'd arrest him if he went to the climate change summit. So they're basically, he will not go to the climate change summit. So do they want him there? Do they not want him there? I think Iran is a very important country, especially considering it's a huge petroleum producer. So in terms of some of his political views outside of his actions, he supports sex segregation. He has this quote, "I think this is a good move because the majority of women do a better job in a totally relaxed atmosphere, and fit are required." So an interesting stance, but perhaps in some areas it might be true, but I think most people are not pro-sex segregation, but perhaps depending on the culture, it could be better in some areas. In terms of, he believes in the Islamization of universities, so kind of not the separation of church and education. He believes in revision of interest and censorship of Western culture, so revision of the internet. So, and he wants to censor Western ideas coming through their internet. He supports the amputation of thieves' hands. He says it is one of our honors to do that. It's a pretty harsh thing to cut off one's hand for stealing, but perhaps it does. Maybe there is a sufficient deterrence. I wonder. He said they should be honored and esteemed for their in his involvement in the 1988 execution. So he doesn't apologize, or he does not repent for his involvement in the 1988 executions. He believes in terms of economic sanctions, he thinks they're a powerful tool, but he believes he needs to approach a resistance economy, so kind of working around the sanctions that the U.S. have put on Iran. And he said, is incomplete to talk about culture and economy without the role of women. So I think that's important to note. As we'll see, he does have daughters. And so although he does believe in sex segregation and wearing covered up, he does believe they are an important aspect of society. But it's debatable if he's a leader of change in this area or more of a conservative. I think he's more on the conservative side in that respect. In terms of his personal life, he's married to Jamileh Al-Mouhouda, who is the daughter of the Mashhad Friday Prayers Imam Ahmed Al-Moheda, and she is also a associate professor at Tehran's Shahid Basedi University and the president of the university's Institute of Fundamental Studies of Science and Technology. So his wife is very well educated. She teaches, she knows science, she knows technology, and her father is also the leader of the Friday prayers at his home city, which is a big public speaker and a very important person in his home city. As mentioned, he has two daughters and two grandchildren. One daughter studied at Sharif University, and one studied at Tehran University. Could not find their ages, but I think that's something that he keeps more private. He has personal sanctions from the U.S. given on 2019 from the Bureau of Human Rights Violations. He has also written multiple books, named one of which Lectures on the Rules of Jurisprudence, which is a 3-volume work, one section on judicial, one section on economic, and one on religious sanctions. He also wrote a book called Heirse Bewares, or Inheritance Without Heirs, and a book called Conflict of Principle and Appearance in Jurisprudence and Law. So a very important leader, and I think the most important takeaway here is that he is the most likely front runner to become the next Supreme leader. So obviously we've started to see what kind of an individual he is and where he comes from, and I think given his age, he's only 61, turning 62 this year. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of Raisi. So, in terms of the images and quotes here, we have quickly the quotes. He's 8th and current president of Iran, former Chief Justice and former Attorney General, descendant of Prophet Muhammad and Ali, and member of the 1988 Death Committee. So, the country, population of 83.99 million people, quite large, over double the size of Canada in terms of population. GDP 445.3 billion. I put a star here because that is actually much lower today because of oil prices, but at the time I put the Iran on the list, it was at this level, and it's most comparable, I think, or in this I'm comparing it to Austria. I think they actually are pretty close in terms of overall power. An area of 1.648 million kilometers squared, and the capital is Tehran. In terms of images, in the top right we have the symbol of his descendants of Hussein ibn Ali Saids, which are the descendants of Prophet Muhammad, and down here we have the Ali ibn Hussein Zain al-Abid Saids, which is the grandson of Ali. So two very important logos, or very important symbols. Below we have the symbol of Mashhad, which is the city he was born in or grew up in. Down to the left we have the symbol of the Popular Front of Islamic Revolution Forces, which is the party he is associated with. To the right we have the symbol of his Bonyad, which is, if I can find it here, I'll have to check that later, but that is the symbol of his Bonyad. His quotes: Iran's power in the region creates security. Iran's regional capacities bring about peace and security in other countries and are aimed at countering the threats of hegemonic powers. So he obviously believes Iran is a very important country, both in the region, but also globally. Hegemonic powers, I think he's quite clearly referring to the U.S. here. He says, it is my religious and revolutionary responsibility to run for president. So it's a very strong Islamist and with a clerical experience, not the highest level Ayatollah, but educated in this sense. He believes that is a big part of his decision to run and his reason for being in power. And lastly, we need fundamental change in the executive management of the country and a government that fights poverty and corruption. So I think the corruption point is important because it's sort of a critique of the incumbent, so kind of indicating that he might be a bringer of change, but also poverty, which is especially important considering the declining price of petroleum. Let's see if I can find the name of the Bonyad. Yes, the name of the Bonyad is the Astan Quds Razavi. I got a lot of writing here to look through. So before, I don't usually do this, but I thought he had some really nice pictures, and I don't think the top right one really captures his identity. He kind of looks kind of older and hard to picture, but as a young individual, you can see here, he has quite a charismatic aura. So there's, like, you could say he just knew the right people, but also maybe the right people found him. I think he looks like someone who would be open to mentorship, but also, as you can see down here, a good public speaker and one who is quite impressionable. So thought I'd point that out here as well. Paint a picture. They say a picture says 1,000 words, so feel free to stop and look at that as well. So moving to Alexander van der Bellen, the President of Austria. So he was born on the 18th of January, 1944, so he is 78 years old. So not much older, but quite significantly older. And important to note, he was born in January, very early in the year, whereas Raisi was born very late in the year, December, so I don't have to say his 78th year, for example. I could say he was 78, unless it was before January 18th, which are only 18 out of 365 days, so less likely. But also, we'll talk about that more in the comparison. So he was formerly a professor of economics at the University of Vienna and the University of Innsbruck. He was the spokesman of Austria's Green Party for the longest period in its history, and he is, as mentioned, the current president of Austria. He's considered a centrist liberal, a supporter of the EU and European federalism. He's nominally independent, however, he's quite significantly supported by the Greens in the 2016 elections when he won. He's the second Green president of an EU country after Raimons Vajons of Latvia, and the first directly elected by a popular vote. He's endorsed by left leaders in the Social Democratic Party and conservatives from the People's Party, so making him more of a centrist. But you can say he calls himself a centrist, but depending on what you think of his involvement with the Greens, you might call him more of a leftist, which is quite the contrast of Raisi. So in terms of his early life, he was born in the 1970s, so he's got quite a big family history that we'll briefly cover. In the 1700s, his patrilineal ancestors, so on his father's side, emigrated from the Netherlands to the Russian Empire. His grandfather, Alexander von der Bellen, was served as the head of the civilian regional government in Pskov, which is a city in northwestern Russia. So leading as a civilian in the regional government made him of the upper class in Russia, despite being from the Netherlands. During the Russian Civil War, however, in 1917 to 1922, part of his family escaped the Bolsheviks and migrated to the newly independent Republic of Estonia. His father, Alexander von der Bellen, married an Estonian Alma Siebold in Kihelkonna in Saaremaa, which is Estonia's largest island, and they obtained Estonian citizenship there. In June of 1940, there was the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which would involve the partition of Poland. Ribbentrop was from Nazi Germany, and Molotov was from the Soviet Union. They agreed on the partition of Poland through a non-aggression agreement, and the Estonia was invaded by the Red Army and later annexed by the USSR. In February or March of 1941, his father and mother and sister moved to Nazi Germany under the German-Soviet Frontier Treaty. So basically, Soviet Union and Germany had agreed to take over Poland, and during this time they slipped into Nazi Germany, and they were accepted as Volksdeutsch, which is German without citizenship. So at this time, as Germany was taking a lot of countries, including Austria and Poland and parts of Czechoslovakia, they were taking in Germans people who they believed were of German roots, but not actually holding German citizenship. At this point, it also might be noted that they changed the name to von der Bellen from van der Bellen to claim their Dutch origins. But as we'll see, they change it back to van der Bellen, which is a bit more Germanic. Von would be Dutch, which is from the Netherlands. So at this time, sneaking or through the German-Soviet frontier treaty, they moved to Vienna, and this is where Alexander was born on January 18th, 1944, and he was baptized into the Lutheran Church. As the Red Army approached, he escaped to the Conner Valley in Tyrol, which is in western Austria, and his father became a businessman again. So he was born in Austria, but as we'll see, he grew up much of his young life in Tyrol. So in terms of his education at this point, he completed his primary school at Innsbruck, the capital of Tyrol, in 1954 when he was 10 years old. He completed his A-levels at the Academic Grammar School of Innsbruck in 1962 at 18 years old. He had Estonian citizenship like his parents until 1958 when he was 14 years old. There's no references of if he was bullied or not, but it must be noted that he was not actually an Austrian until he was 14 or held Austrian citizenship, and his parents were both Estonian or had Estonian citizenship. He did not complete his mandatory military service in the Austrian Armed Forces, first because he failed a medical examination as unfit for the army, but he later passed, but due to several respites during his education, and as we'll see, during his marriage, he ended up never serving in his mandatory service in the armed forces. Later also he became a professor, so he was no longer required to do this as well. So interestingly enough, he married when he was 18 years old to Bridget Huttner, who was born in 1943 and recently died in 2018 before they actually divorced in 2015. So she was actually 1 year older than him, born in 1943. He was born in 1944, and he had his first child when he was only 19 years old. So quite quick on the family game, I guess. It's a different way of living one's life. I think there's reading Thus Spake Zarathustra. He says once one gets a wife and a family, or a family, there's different types of families these days, but one becomes secure or they become more content. So Nietzsche says if one wants to stay hungry, they should not form a family, which is a very, very dangerous idea. But it's interesting that van der Bellen maintained his ambition after having a child already at 19 years old and being married at 18. So it obviously did not make him complacent. Their marriage lasted 50 years, but they later divorced in 2015 when he married his longtime friend and director of the Greens Club, Doris Schmidauer, and they live in Vienna and Cottonau, Tyrol. So later in his life, he eventually marries an old friend of his, and his previous wife died shortly after. Kind of a sad story, but if it's love, it's love. There's so maybe I don't know if he should be particularly shamed for that, but it's obviously might have been hard on his family and his wife, but we'll talk about that perhaps later. Like, for example, Jung took a second wife, not to jump around too much, and Jung was from they say he was a genius, so he was permitted to take a second wife, but I don't think van der Bellen would really be fully justified in divorcing, but love is love, so we'll move on. He studied economics at the University of Innsbruck in 1962 and got his master's in 1966. When he was 22 years old, his dissertation was called The Collective Households and Public Service Enterprise Problems of Their Coordination. So I'm talking about households and service enterprises, and basically a discussion on a planned economy. He received his doctorate in 1970 at 26 years old, In 1968 to 1971, at 27 years old, he served as a scientific assistant to Clemens August Andrea, who was the Dean of Law and Political Science at the University of Innsbruck, and the Public Finance Institute. So he was assistant directly to the dean. It's interesting that he was focused on economics, but this mentor of his was in law and political science. So perhaps the education kind of bled into his understanding. So we might conclude he knows a decent amount about law and political science as well. He also served for a bit as a research fellow at Berlin School of Social Science Center, or Berlin Social Science Center, from 1972 to 1974. He was awarded the qualification of university lecturer at the University of Innsbruck in 1975 when he was 31 years old. In 1976 to 1980, when he was 46 years old, he became an associate professor at the University of Innsbruck, and he studied decision and preference theories with his friend, Turkish economist Murat Sertel. So preference theories and decision and preference theories are two very large branches in economics, so definitely not a limiting field he took. Was it his passion? I think so, or maybe it was more opportunistic. In terms of his political career in the mid-1970s, so while doing his academic career, he was also involved in politics. In the mid-1970s, he became a member of the Social Democratic Party, and he stayed in that a member until the late 1980s, from his 30s until his 40s, when his interests turned toward the environmental movement, when a former postgraduate student who was spokesman of the Green Party at the time, Peter Pills, brought him in. He said at this point he turned from an arrogant anti-capitalist to a generous left liberal. In his book, he actually says he turned into a liberal Anglo-Saxon coinage, which is just a different, but basically he believes in the Anglo-Saxon economic theories. Well, I'll talk more about that specifically soon. In 1992, he was nominated by the Greens for office of President of the Court of Audit, but he was defeated by the People's Party Franz Fiedler. Due to the poor party performance in 1994, this is the Green Party in the legislative elections, he took over as party chairman, the party chairmanship from Christoph Chorer in 1997 when he was 53 years old. So at 53, he becomes chairman of the Green Party, and he remained as chairman until 2008, making him almost 11 years the longest serving chairman in the Green Party of Austria history. He had the approval during this time went from 4.8% to 7.4% in 1999 to 9.5% in 2002 to 11.05% in 2006. Then it dropped to 10.11%, and in 2008 he handed over the office to the third president of the National Assembly, Eva Gabashino. So although much success, eventually success has to stop, and he sort of passes on this role to another. But as we see, it's not that he was done; he had other ambitions. He was also a member of the National Council from 1994 to 2012, which is the lower house of Austria, like the House of Commons we have in Canada, or the House of Representatives, or Congress in the United States. He dropped out in the 2012, 1999, and 2008 the parliamentary leader of the National Council. He served on the budget during this time. So while on the National Council, he served on many committees, including the Budget Committee, the Main Committee, the Science Committee, the Finance Committee, the Industrial Committee, the Administrative Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, of which he served as both a clerk and chairman. And so he was obviously very involved, but also it must be noted that he's kind of jumps around as the whole gambit of the committees. In 2011, he was elected by the red-green city and state governments as commissioner of the Universities of Research. So it must be noted the red-green. He's got multiple party support as as a commissioner of universities and research, and as a professor himself, I think it makes sense that he would be in this role. In 2010, he won the Viennese state elections with the slogan "Go Professor Go." He started off in 29th place, but then rose all the way to first place. But he did not actually accept the leave of the National Council until 2012. It's important to note that he kind of goes from federal politics to state politics to the Vienna, which is the capital region. And he did serve a time in this. But he did not actually represent the Green Party because he submitted his application in that respect too late. However, he didn't serve there for too long because in 2015, he decided he wanted to, since August 2014, he was viewed as a presidential candidate, and the Green Party had already bought the domain vdb2016.at, which is Van der Bellen 2016 at AT. So by 2014, the Green Party and he were already hinting at or quite openly revealing that he would run for president. On the 8th of January 2016, he officially announced his candidacy for president in a video message, which is actually 10 days before his 72nd birthday. So, as I said, if born on January 18, very few things are before your birthday, but this was, so he announced it before his birthday. He suspended his party membership with the Greens on May 2016, but his nonpartisanship has been questioned. The Green Party still does support him. They say the quote, "Together for Van der Bellen." They also contributed 6 employees to his party. His campaign office is on their premises in their headquarters, in the Green Party headquarters, and they also gave $1.2 million to his campaign. But it must be noted that he also received 18,398 private donations amounting to 2.7 million euros. So less than half of his funding did come from the Green Party. So yes, he's got some partisanship, but not too much, we could say. And it must be noted that because he's not actually not affiliated with the party, he doesn't actually have to reveal what the donations were. But for example, Herbert Hofer of the Freedom Party of Austria received 3.4 million euros from the party, so he received less than his competitor. Yes, some partisanship, but he's trying to, or it's not as strong as perhaps it is in the case of Hofer. So in the election, which is as interesting as Raisi's election, in the first round he only won 21.34% of the vote, whereas Norbert Hofer won 35.05%. In the second round, before the postal votes were submitted, Hofer had 51.93% of the vote, and Van der Bellen had 48.07%. So there was no decision that night, kind of like the U.S. election we had in last year in 2021, where the election switched. They thought Donald Trump would win, and then I went to bed at like 2 a.m., and then the next day Joe Biden had won. This was kind of the case in Austria. And the next day, Van der Bellen woke up with 50.35% of the vote versus Hofer, who had 49.64% of the vote in the second round. So he led by only 31,026 votes. There was 72.7% voter turnout. There was even a correction, and they said, in fact, the difference was less than 31,000, but this only affected the third decimal place of the percentages. The Freedom Party chairman, Heinzer Christian Strack, brought a 150-page notice to the Constitutional Court to highlight voting deficiencies, and this was accepted, and they repeated the second round. And on the 4th of December, he won 53.8% vote, so he grew his lead to 348,000, and a slightly larger voter turnout of 74.2% voter turnout. So he was inaugurated on the 26th of January at 73 years old. So a lot happened there. Very exciting. It's important to note that in Raisi, as we'll talk in comparison though, he contested his original defeat in 2017, submitting a 100-page letter. In this case, Van der Bellen actually won, and the Heinz Heinz Christian Strack brought a 150-page report, and they tried it again, but he still won. So perhaps if Raisi's was contested, maybe he would have still won. So in terms of his time as president, he's been considered a broad-minded liberal, inspired by the Anglo-Saxon liberals, particularly John Stuart Mill. He strongly supports EU and European federalism. He's pro-Syrian refugees in Europe. He references his own refugee status because his family had much history being refugees. So I think that's nice that he's able to see that in the Syrian refugees. He believes Islamophobia is a serious issue in Austria and in Europe. He said, as I don't know how seriously, but he said other women perhaps should try wearing headscarves to show solidarity with Islamic women. He's a critic of Trump's right-wing populism. He's also he was a critic of Brexit and the annexation, and he believes that the Austrian embassy of Israel to remain in Tel Aviv. He's against that. He believes the embassy of Israel should remain in Tel Aviv and not go to Jerusalem. He's criticized Erdogan's lack of freedom to protest in Turkey. He left the Lutheran Church because one of his pastors, he had an argument. He says he does not believe in one God, but a message or vision. But that year, he later joined the Protestant Church, so still religious. It's important to note that actually Austria is majority Catholic, so that didn't really stop him by being firstly Lutheran and then Protestant, so they're, I guess, accepting of his religious preferences. He was praised by Estonia for having won the Austrian election. They offered him he could still have his citizenship if he wanted. They're very proud to see an Estonian by his parents having won the Austrian election. He's also paid Freemason dues for 10 years. He no longer does this, but that's interesting. I think it tells something about his character. At least he wants to kind of be an insider. I think that's what being a Freemason is about. My grandfather was a Freemason. I thought about it too, but it's I think once you go there, it's kind of just a club, like a fraternity, and you pay dues, which is that's the main thing. It's expensive, but I think that kind of person wants to be an insider. In terms of some of his personal aspects, he says he's a mild Donald Duck comic addict. I don't know how true that is, but he's also a chain smoker. When Heinz Christian Strack was being nominated for chancellor, we'll talk about the quote soon, but he said, "I don't want Austria to become the first country in Western Europe led by a populist right-wing pan-Germanic fraternity member," so quite against the right-wing chain smoker, as I mentioned. But in Austria, it must be noted that the president actually has a lot more power than many other European countries, because the president is also commander-in-chief of the army, and they have rights to refuse ministerial nominations. So I spoke of his life. He has 2 sons with Bridget, but they divorced in 2015. She died in 2018, fortunately, but he has now took a new. She died in 2018, but he has since taken a new wife who is involved in the Greens Club, Doris Schmidauer, and they live in Vienna and Konnertal, Tyrol, so together. So, looking at the images and such, so here's the flag of Austria, population 8.971 million, GDP 429.0 billion, area 83,849 kilometers squared, so much smaller in terms of area, and so it's got about 1/10 of the population and about 1/20th of the area, so much smaller, but its GDP is very close. In fact, it's even larger at this point. And the capital is Vienna, which is one of my favorite cities in Europe. Great Wiener Schnitzel, Wien, beautiful, great opera house too. Okay, here are the symbols. In the top right is the flag of Tyrol, the region he grew up in Austria. Here we have the symbol of the University of Innsbruck, where he originally got his start of his academic career. Down below we have the symbol of the University of Vienna, where he later became a professor of. Down here we have this flag of, or the symbol of the Green Party of Austria. To the right we have the symbol of Vienna, which he actually served in state politics for a little brief while. As for the, he's the, as, my apologies, that should say current president of Austria. I'm not going to redo the whole video just for that, but I'm sorry about that. I changed from an arrogant anti-capitalist to a generous left liberal, so he kind of a dynamic individual. He started off with a different party, but he switched maybe through his time as a professor, but nonetheless he did change throughout his career. I don't want Austria to become the first country in Western Europe led by a populist right-wing pan-Germanic fraternity member, so quite a tongue he has, as a chain smoker might do. I don't want to stereotype, but he's kind of a little tougher for a professor. From the beginning, I fought and argued for a pro-European Austria, so very supportive of Europe. And some wanted to assert that the presidential election was a vote between two extremes. I must object to this. I stand in the middle of society. So he considers himself a centrist despite his support from the Green Party. So he's the longest serving spokesman of the Austrian Green Party, former professor of economics, and he has Dutch, Russian, and Estonian roots as well. So I couldn't find as many images of him while he was young, perhaps on account of his being older. So here's just a speech of him speaking, kind of get a feel for what kind of a speaker he is. But most importantly, I found this picture of both him and Raisi shaking hands. So I think that's quite coincidental that was also one of the first to come up. Maybe it was just due to my own search history. But look at these two leaders that we're covering today, holding hands and being together. I think it's quite coincidental. And they both look sure that he looks happy. He looks happy too. Yeah, I think they're both. I think they both admire each other. So to the comparison. So Ebrahim Raisi was a descendant of both Muhammad and Ali. However, Alexander van der Bellen was a refugee, and he does have ancestors of Russian nobility. However, his parents were Estonian. He doesn't have as much clout as Ebrahim Raisi would in terms of running for president. In terms of politics, Ebrahim Raisi is a right-wing Islamicist, whereas Alexander van der Bellen, despite saying he's a centrist, he is more left-wing and environmentalist. One is 61 years old, the other is 78 years old, a 17-year age gap, also, it will be 16 in December for only a few days of the year, but a pretty big age gap. One, Ebrahim Raisi was from a legal background, whereas Alexander van der Bellen was economics background, but it must be noted that they also touched into many other industries as well. But they both rose also to the top of one became a professor, whereas the other became as far as the Attorney General of Iran. They also stayed involved in these private endeavors right up until they became really involved in politics. So there was no gap. They did not lose any momentum. They're both also not from the capital. So Ebrahim Raisi was from Mashhad, which is the second biggest city, and van der Bellen grew up in Innsbruck. So both of them are somewhat outsiders in that regard. They both have 2 children. However, Raisi has 2 daughters, 2 grandchildren as well, whereas van der Bellen has 2 sons. In terms of women, they are both, Ebrahim Raisi is pro face covers, and Alexander van der Bellen is acceptant of face covers. Ebrahim Raisi has criticized the U.S. and the sanctions they have put on Iran, and Alexander van der Bellen has criticized Trump. He, however, does seem to like Biden, but we'll see how that may play out. It may change, but so far he does like Biden, and he congratulated him on his Twitter. Ebrahim Raisi comes from the Shia majority, and he has a clerical path, so he's in the majority religiously, whereas Alexander van der Bellen was Lutheran, then he changed to Protestant, but in a Catholic majority country. Most importantly, however, or not most importantly, but another important detail is that they both had their elections contested, whereas Raisi, the opposing party, Raisi originally contested his 2017 election by submitting a 100-page report, whereas van der Bellen, 150-page report, was sent to question his. However, both seem to, Raisi ended up going on to win. Some say, once again, contesting it again, that maybe that was corrupt, but he ended up winning regardless. And van der Bellen also ended up, they recast the vote, and he still won. So I guess both of them have that resilience, and that must have been quite a stressful time. So both are, one concluded, of great character. So that is the life as we know it of Ebrahim Raisi and van der Bellen of Iran and Austria, respectively. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you continue to support. Thank you very much.